My name is Nancy Hart. I'm 58 years old, and I manage a countryside wedding venue in Connecticut. In 20 years of work, I've seen it all: bridezillas, grooms who ran at the last minute, and mothers tearing bouquets apart in tears. But I never thought I'd one day become part of a story like that myself. My niece Brooke, she's like a daughter to me. I raised her after my younger sister passed away, and now she was getting married. The wedding was supposed to be held at my venue, with my team, at my cost. And then I found out I wasn't invited to her bridal shower. Not because there wasn't enough room, not because I lived too far, but because, in her words, I was bad vibes. Too old, too out of sync with her friends' aesthetic. So I did something no one expected. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I simply opened my laptop. And on the day she arrived in a white robe, champagne in hand, the door was locked. If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. For the past 2 decades, I managed a wedding venue just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, a rustic, charming estate tucked behind maple trees and old stone walls, the kind of place that made people believe in fairy tales again. I had built that place from the ground up, poured my savings, my time, my whole identity into every inch of it. I knew every tree on the property, every creak of the old floorboards, every beam of afternoon light that came through the chapel windows. But long before that venue ever existed, I was a woman raising a child that wasn't my own. Brooke came into my life when I was 35. Her mother, my younger sister, died in a car accident late one October night. I remember the sound of the phone ringing, the numbness in my legs as I answered, the way the world tilted as the officer on the other end explained what had happened. I remember driving 4 hours without thinking, showing up at the hospital to find a wide-eyed 6-year-old clinging to a nurse's hand, confused and frightened and suddenly motherless. There was no discussion, no debate. I didn't have children of my own, but I didn't hesitate. I took Brooke home with me that same night. We lived in a small apartment above a diner back then. I was still working long hours as a catering manager, juggling events, paperwork, and sleepless nights. But somehow, we made it work. I braided her hair before school. I packed her lunches. I read her bedtime stories and lay next to her when she had nightmares. I helped with homework, attended PTA meetings, and saved every little drawing she made with glitter and glue. She called me Aunt Nancy at first. Eventually, it became just Nancy. And even though I was never mom, I was the one who showed up day after day for every scraped knee, every forgotten project, every missed birthday party. I was the one who stayed. When she turned 12, we moved into a small house on the edge of town. I took out a second loan and bought an abandoned estate with the idea of turning it into a venue. It was a gamble, but I needed something that could support us both. Brooke helped me paint the walls, sand the banisters, plant flowers along the path that led to the barn. She grew up with that place, just as I grew into my role as both caretaker and entrepreneur. Through high school, Brooke was bright and beautiful and just a little wild. I was strict but not unkind. I wanted her to feel supported but not smothered. I let her make her mistakes, but I was always nearby, ready to catch her when she fell. When she got into college out of state, I cried in the parking lot after dropping her off. I sent her care packages every month: mac and cheese, tea bags, handwritten notes folded between socks and shampoo. I paid her tuition without telling her I'd taken a second mortgage. I never missed a phone call, never hung up without saying, "I love you." She graduated with a degree in marketing and moved to New York. We stayed in touch, weekly phone calls, texts, occasional visits. But distance has a way of fading people. I watched her become someone else, sharper, more polished, more careful with her words. She made new friends, joined new circles. I didn't always understand the world she moved through, but I supported it. When she got engaged, she called me first. Her voice was breathless with excitement. She said, "Nancy, I want to have the wedding at your place. No one else's would feel right." I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. I told her, of course, that it would be my gift, that she didn't need to worry about a thing. She thanked me 100 times. She said I'd made her dreams come true. I believed her. I sat down that night and began planning. I cleared the calendar. I met with florists and caterers. I started a folder labeled Brooke's Wedding, decorated it with pressed flowers, and tucked a photo of her as a little girl inside the front flap, because that's who she was to me. Not the woman in Manhattan with curated Instagram posts and a minimalist wardrobe. She was still the girl in rain boots running through the meadow behind our house. She was still mine. At least, I thought she was. It was a Thursday afternoon when I found out. I had just finished meeting with a florist, one of my usual vendors who was preparing a proposal for Brooke's wedding, and I decided to sit down in my office and catch up on emails. The autumn sun was spilling through the tall windows, casting gold across my desk. I remember the way the light touched everything, made it seem so warm, so full of promise. That moment, like so many before it, felt like peace. Then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. I don't usually keep alerts on, but Brooke had tagged my venue's account in a story the day before, and the app had flagged new activity. I opened it absent-mindedly, expecting more mood boards or sneak peeks at color palettes. But instead, I found myself staring at a group of young women in silk pajamas, holding champagne flutes, laughing against the backdrop of a lavishly decorated hotel suite. "Bridal shower weekend begins," one caption read. Another photo showed a table set for brunch, name cards, floral centerpieces, candles. Brooke sat at the center, her hair curled in soft waves, a sash across her chest that read, "Bride to be." Her smile was radiant. Her friends flanked her on either side, each one dressed in matching robes, toasting her with glasses of Prosecco. I blinked, stared, scrolled. There were photos, videos, tags. Everyone was there. Her college friends, her New York co-workers, even Rachel, my neighbor's daughter whom Brooke used to babysit. But there was no message, no email, no phone call, no invitation, not even a mention. I hadn't been told anything about a bridal shower, let alone asked to join. I checked my calendar, convinced I had missed something. Maybe the invitation had gotten lost. Maybe she had texted and I hadn't seen it. I searched through my inbox, my messages, even my spam folder. Nothing. That sinking feeling in my stomach deepened. I sat still for a long time, phone in hand, watching the stream of curated joy play out in real time. The captions, the hashtags, jot to good vibes only, bride squad, no drama, just love. Each one felt like a brick placed gently between us, a subtle message, but one I couldn't ignore. I finally opened our last text thread, scrolled back to her last message, a simple, "Thanks again for everything, Nancy. Can't wait for the big day." Nothing about the shower, nothing about the weekend, nothing about me. I wrote out a message, something light. "The pictures from your shower look beautiful. Everything turned out lovely." I stared at the screen. Then I deleted it. I couldn't pretend I wasn't hurt. Later that evening, I called one of my junior staff members to go over the final setup schedule. We chatted for a while, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation, she hesitated and asked, "By the way, did you decide not to go to Brooke's shower, or?" I asked what she meant. She paused, then said softly, "I overheard Brooke talking to one of her friends during the venue walkthrough. She said she didn't invite you because she thought it would be awkward." That word landed like a stone. She went on carefully, like she was walking over broken glass. She said something about wanting to keep the vibe light, that you were, and I quote, kind of bad vibes. But I'm sure she didn't mean. I didn't need to hear the rest. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat in silence. Bad vibes. After 20 years, after scraped knees and late night study sessions, after birthdays and tears and college tuition and Sunday night phone calls, after all the hours spent planning her wedding, making everything perfect, not just for her, but for the memory of her mother. I had become an aesthetic disruption, a presence too inconvenient for her curated world. Not trendy enough, not easy enough, not young enough, not enough. I didn't sleep much that night. My thoughts moved in loops, questions circling like gnats. What had changed, when it changed, and why I hadn't seen it coming. But deep down, I knew. Brooke had grown into someone who valued images over roots, who measured affection in reposts and relevance. I had loved her in the language of sacrifices and steadiness, but she had learned to speak in something entirely different, something I no longer understood. I told myself I wouldn't make it about me, that she was young, that this was her moment, that I had no right to expect a seat at every table just because I had once carried her through every storm. But there was no denying it. Something inside me had shifted, not broken, just snapped, not loud, but final. In the days that followed, I moved through the venue like I was walking underwater. Everything looked the same, sounded the same, but felt just slightly off, like the walls were listening, like the floors remembered. The curtains swayed in their usual rhythm. The birds still nested under the beams near the garden trellis, but I no longer saw them with the same affection. There was a distance between me and the place I had built with my bare hands, a silence that wasn't about sound. It was about space. Brooke didn't call. She didn't send a thank you. She didn't acknowledge that I had seen the photos or that I hadn't been there. She moved forward with her plans, sending timelines to the coordinator I had assigned, confirming menus, finalizing the seating chart. I watched it all unfold from a distance, like someone observing her own life from behind glass. The irony, of course, was that I was still doing everything for her, still checking invoices, still confirming vendors, still polishing the windows and setting out candles and making sure the outdoor heaters would work if the temperature dropped on her wedding night. I was handling it all with the same care I would for any other client, because that's what I had become, a client, not a family member, not a guardian. Not someone worthy of a chair at the table, let alone a presence at the prelude. She delegated most of the communication to her fiancé and planner after that. Her voice became an absence I noticed in every email. She no longer signed messages with a heart or a thank you. She no longer included me in anything outside of logistics. It was business now, formal, clinical, and I followed her lead. I never confronted her. I never asked why. I had raised her to be independent. I had taught her to handle things with grace, to speak clearly, to honor truth. So I let her speak her truth in the language she chose, omission. There was a moment, one brief, flickering moment, where I considered canceling the wedding then and there. I had the power to. The contract, though informal, gave me the right to withdraw hosting. I had done it before, once, for a couple who had violated the venue policies. No one would have blamed me if I cited emotional conflict or lack of payment. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I walked the grounds every morning, taking notes, counting chairs, testing light bulbs, touching up paint. I swept the chapel steps. I cut roses from the garden for the bridal suite. I organized the parking layout so guests wouldn't get wet if it rained. I did all of this while carrying a strange heaviness in my chest, like a deep and ancient grief I hadn't named. People around me started to notice. One of the decorators asked if I was feeling okay. A florist dropped by and said I looked tired. I nodded and smiled and deflected, the way women like me have done our whole lives, turning pain into politeness. I wasn't ready to explain. I wasn't even ready to admit. At night, I'd sit on the back porch with a glass of wine and watch the lights glow through the trees. I'd listen to the quiet hum of the countryside, the faint rustling of deer in the brush. This land had carried me through so much, through loss, through sacrifice, through the uncertain years of raising a child who wasn't mine. And now, even it seemed to sense what was coming. The final planning meeting was scheduled for Monday. The wedding was that Saturday. I remember that detail vividly because I had highlighted it in red on the wall calendar, thinking it would be the most joyful day of the year. I had already ordered fresh linens. The custom monogram signage was being delivered the next morning. The caterers were prepping for 120 guests. Everything was set. But something inside me had already come undone. There's a kind of silence that precedes a storm, not stillness, but a vibration in the air. You feel it in your teeth, in your fingertips, in the soft spaces behind your knees. It's the moment before a sky splits open, the breath before the thunder. That's where I lived that week. I didn't speak of what I felt. I didn't confide in anyone. I just moved through each day, doing what I always did, while a quiet voice inside me repeated a single aching sentence over and over again. You don't belong here anymore. The morning I made the decision, the air was brittle with frost. I remember opening the back door and stepping outside barefoot, just for a moment, feeling the cold bite into the soles of my feet. It shocked me fully awake in a way coffee never could. The leaves on the lawn had hardened overnight, curling at the edges like burned paper. The world felt sharp, clear. I had barely slept the night before. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the thin cracks that had formed in the plaster over the years. I tried to remember when they first appeared. Like most slow damage, it had happened quietly, without ceremony. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when Brooke had stopped seeing me as family, just as I couldn't pinpoint when those cracks started spreading. But by then, they were visible in everything. The meeting was scheduled for noon, a final walkthrough. It would be the last time the bride and groom stood on the property before the wedding day. I got to the venue early, as always. I unlocked the side gates, opened the main hall, walked through the reception space, making sure everything was still pristine. The flower arrangements had arrived for storage, and the delivery crew was stacking boxes of centerpieces in the back. Everything looked beautiful, flawless, almost insulting. I stood in the doorway of the bridal suite, looking at the dressing mirror. A mirror I had installed myself, with bulbs around the edge like something out of an old Hollywood film. I remembered the day I put it up. How proud I'd been. How Brooke had once twirled in front of it, pretending to be a princess. I saw her face there still for a second, superimposed over mine, smiling, young, unburdened. But that little girl was gone. In her place was a woman who saw me as a placeholder, a tool, someone to be appreciated only when convenient and discarded the moment I clashed with her carefully curated image. I wasn't part of the vision anymore. I was the background, the noise, the bad vibes. That phrase kept looping through my head, sharp and absurd. Bad vibes, like I was an old sweater she didn't want to wear around her shiny new friends. Something embarrassing, unaesthetic. I had fed her, clothed her, paid for her braces, sat in emergency rooms with her in the middle of the night, and I was now a vibe that didn't fit the mood board. I went to my office, closed the door, and sat down in front of my laptop. The screen lit up instantly. The scheduling software I used for the venue was already open, a color-coded grid of bookings and payments. I clicked on Brooke's name. There it was, her wedding, listed, confirmed, and unpaid. I blinked. No deposit, no balance, nothing had been processed. A part of me had known this already. I'd seen the line item before, But I hadn't looked closely. I hadn't wanted to. Because the moment I did, I would no longer have to imagine taking a step back. I could legally, cleanly, entirely remove myself. I hovered the cursor over the cancellation button. My fingers shook slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of the moment. It wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about value, respect, acknowledgement. No one had said thank you. No one had asked if I was okay. No one had noticed that I'd been silent since the shower. I had become invisible in a space I had built with my own hands. I read through the policy I had written myself. In the absence of a signed agreement or completed payment, the venue reserves the right to cancel the event with 72 hours notice, no justification required. There were 4 days left, plenty of time. I clicked cancel. The system prompted me for a reason. I typed one word, void. I confirmed it. The reservation disappeared from the screen like it had never existed. I sat still afterward. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess it. I just breathed. For the first time in weeks, I could hear the breath moving in and out of my body without pressure behind it. Then I walked outside. I called the rental company and told them to delay the delivery. I informed the catering team there had been a change of schedule. I spoke with the venue staff, told them we were going dark for the weekend, and gave them the days off. When the phone rang, Brooke's number lighting up on the screen, I didn't answer. I let it buzz until the sound felt like nothing. By that evening, I had placed a simple sign on the locked gate. Venue closed. No entry, private property. I turned off the exterior lights, locked every door, and went home. Not out of spite, not for revenge, but because I finally understood something I had refused to admit for far too long. I had given more than I could afford, and it was time to stop giving to people who didn't notice they were holding a gift. The morning of the wedding arrived without ceremony. No alarms, no staff arrivals, no trucks pulling up to the gravel driveway. Just the steady hum of wind in the trees and the occasional sound of birds stretching into the gray sky. I woke early and made myself coffee, holding the mug in both hands as I stood by the kitchen window, watching the early light break across the field behind the house. The calm was surreal. I felt nothing and everything all at once. The venue sat quiet and still, just a few miles away, locked, undisturbed, waiting. I didn't go there right away. I let the hours pass. I cleaned my living room. I washed the remaining dishes from the night before. I sat on the edge of my bed and folded a stack of laundry slowly, as if stretching the minutes to avoid what I knew would come. My phone had been buzzing since sunrise. Calls, texts, voicemails. I didn't open a single one. By noon, the calls stopped coming, and the knocking started. I had instructed the staff not to come in that day, and they respected my request. The gates remained shut. The signage posted clearly. I had double-checked every lock, every light, every code. There would be no wedding at the Hart Estate that Saturday. Around 12:30, I drove down the long dirt road that led to the property. I parked my car just inside the secondary lot, hidden behind the hedges where guests usually didn't go. From there, I could see the main gate, the front courtyard, and the long gravel turn where the shuttles usually dropped guests. I sat in the car with the engine off, watching. At exactly 1 o'clock, the first car arrived. It was Brooke's. She stepped out slowly, her white satin robe already wrinkled in the back, holding a glass of champagne and her phone. Behind her came a flurry of movement. Her bridesmaids, her makeup artist, her stylist. They laughed, posed for pictures, and moved toward the gate as if they were walking into a movie set. I could hear the faint sound of music playing from one of the portable speakers someone had brought along. The joy in their movements was rehearsed, polished, perfect, until they reached the gate. Brooke reached for the handle. It didn't move. She pulled again, still locked. I could see her lean in, confused, tapping her nails against the metal as she tried to peer inside. Then she noticed the sign: venue closed, no entry, private property. I saw the confusion shift into something else. Frustration first, then panic. She stepped back, looked around. The bridal party gathered around her. There were whispers, raised eyebrows. One of the girls took out her phone, likely trying to call someone. Me, maybe, or the planner, or the assistant who wasn't there because I'd told her not to be. Another car arrived, then another. Guests in dresses and suits stepped out, fanning themselves, looking around in confusion. One woman took off her heels and walked to the gate barefoot. She read the sign and turned back toward her car. Brooke's fiancé arrived next. He got out of the passenger side and went straight to her, his expression tight with nerves. She gestured wildly with her arms, pointing at the gate, then her phone, then toward the main house beyond. He tried to push the gate, rattling it once. It didn't budge. His voice was loud enough for me to hear faintly through the hedges, though not his exact words. They stood there for a long time. Minutes passed. A few of the guests began calling out to others. Some took out their phones. I saw one person film a video, probably for social media, already spinning their version of the chaos. Someone else attempted to jump the side fence, but got caught on the ledge and dropped back down in defeat. A pair of elderly guests, likely distant relatives, simply turned and walked back to their car without saying a word. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt quiet, still, the way you feel when something that's been bleeding finally stops. Eventually, the group began to disperse, slowly, unevenly, like they weren't sure what to do without direction. A few of the bridesmaids sat on the stone bench outside the gate, scrolling their phones, avoiding each other's eyes. Brooke remained standing. Her robe now clung to her sides with sweat. Her makeup had begun to shift under the heat. Her smile was gone. She pulled out her phone again, called someone, probably me. I didn't answer. I sat in the car until the lot emptied, until the bridal party left, until even the most loyal friend gave up and walked away. When the last car rolled off the drive, I stepped out and walked to the gate. The sign was still there, the ground littered with crushed flowers and smeared lipstick-stained napkins. I bent down, picked up a single ivory heel that someone had left behind, and placed it gently on the bench. Then I turned and went home, not with satisfaction, with certainty, the kind that doesn't need applause, just peace. The fallout began almost immediately. By the time I got home and took off my coat, my phone was lit up with messages, missed calls, voicemails, and email notifications piling in like a storm surge. I didn't check any of them at first. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my reading chair, and let the weight of the day pass through me. My body was calm, but my mind hummed like static. Not regret, not relief, just the aftershock of a long overdue collapse. By early evening, word had spread. The first email came from a mutual acquaintance who had attended the wedding, or rather, what was supposed to be the wedding. It was short and passive in tone, a blend of confusion and curiosity masquerading as concern. She wrote that people were wondering what happened, that some were very upset, and that perhaps I should issue a statement to explain myself. I deleted it without replying. Then came the texts. Most were from Brooke. Paragraphs long, full of disbelief, rage, betrayal, and a kind of frantic entitlement I hadn't heard in her voice since she was a teenager, being told she couldn't stay out past curfew. She said I had ruined her life, that I had embarrassed her in front of everyone she cared about, that I had proven I was exactly what she always feared: cold, dramatic, and self-absorbed. There was no mention of the years I had raised her, no reference to the thousands of dollars I had poured into her education, no acknowledgement of the venue she had never paid for, No apology for the way she had excluded me, just fury. I didn't respond. The messages kept coming. Her fiancé wrote once, more restrained but still accusatory. He asked why I hadn't just talked to someone if I had a problem, as if being talked down to and quietly erased were misunderstandings, not choices, as if my silence hadn't already been met with indifference. Rachel messaged too. Her tone was different, quieter, sadder. She said she was sorry I hadn't been at the shower. She said Brooke had seemed different lately, more focused on appearances than people. She said maybe I had gone too far, but she understood. That was the only message I didn't delete right away. By Sunday night, a few of the vendors who had been scheduled for the event called me. One was angry, two were confused. One quietly admitted that they had already seen this kind of thing coming. Entitled brides don't make grateful clients, she said. They make beautiful disasters. I filed away her words. On Monday morning, I returned to the venue. The grounds were still clean. The sign still hung on the gate. I walked the perimeter, taking note of small details. Flowers that needed pruning, a cracked planter near the fountain, a loose hinge on one of the back gates. I took my time. It felt good to move without pressure again, to reclaim the space as my own. I met with my team later that day. I told them what happened, simply and without shame. A few were surprised. One looked relieved. No one judged me. No one quit. We spent the afternoon walking through the calendar for the next few months, adjusting schedules and preparing for a holiday fundraiser we'd been planning. Life moved on, and so did we. A week passed, then two. Brooke didn't call again. At first, I thought she might, that she'd at least try to speak without screaming. But the silence between us grew, and as it did, I began to see it not as a loss, but as clarity, the kind that comes when you finally stop justifying your own mistreatment, when you stop writing off selfishness as youth or cruelty as stress. I had always made space for Brooke. I had always put her first, and she had grown up learning that love meant unquestioned loyalty, even at the cost of dignity. But I was no longer willing to model that version of love, not for her, not for myself. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from a guest who had attended the wedding, an older woman I barely knew. She said she had been shocked, of course, but after hearing what had happened, she felt compelled to write. She said the whole scene reminded her of her own daughter, how she had been shut out quietly over time, how her presence had become inconvenient. She ended the note with 5 words: "You were right to leave." I placed it in a drawer. The space Brooke left behind didn't stay empty. I filled it with small things: gardening, reading, volunteering again at the local shelter. I spent time with women who'd lost their homes and families, but not their kindness. I opened the venue to them one night just for a dinner. We sat around the same tables where people used to toast to forever, and we talked like people who knew that nothing is really forever, especially not illusion. The truth was, I hadn't ruined Brooke's wedding. I had simply stopped pretending it was something worth celebrating. The Saturday that had once been circled in red on the venue calendar came and went without fanfare. It was just another day, quiet and unremarkable, marked not by music or vows or the scent of roses in the air, but by soft light streaming through the chapel windows and the rustling of wind through bare trees. For the first time in years, I had no event to run, no guests to greet, no chaos to manage. The silence was not empty. It was liberating. That day, I woke up early anyway. Old habits die hard. I brewed my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the empty space on my calendar where Brooke's wedding had once been. I stared at it for a long time before closing the planner and putting it away. I no longer needed to memorialize a moment that never truly belonged to me. And yet, as I sipped my coffee, a memory came back to me, uninvited but not unwelcome. My own wedding. It had been a humid Saturday in June. The air was thick with honeysuckle and thunderclouds. We were young, foolishly optimistic, and clinging to a version of love that we hadn't yet grown into. The ceremony had been held in my parents' backyard, under a white tent with sagging corners and mismatched folding chairs. We couldn't afford much, but I had worn a dress passed down from my grandmother, and I remember how it felt, heavy, embroidered with tiny pearls that caught the light whenever I moved. The cake had melted slightly by the time we cut it. The best man lost the rings. My mother cried through the entire toast, and yet it was beautiful in its imperfections. That day, I believed I had stepped into something eternal. But eternity has many forms. My marriage ended 10 years later, not in scandal, but in erosion. The kind of slow wearing away that happens when two people become different and forget how to speak the same language. He left first, but I had already begun to leave in other ways, through silence, through the narrowing of dreams, through the aching effort of holding things together when nothing felt whole. We signed the papers in spring. It rained that day. I remember because the clerk had an umbrella with ducks on it, and it struck me as absurd that something so light-hearted could shield us from a moment that felt so final. Afterward, I returned to the venue, the one I had just begun building. I threw myself into it with a desperation that didn't look like grief from the outside. It looked like passion. People applauded my drive, my vision. No one saw that I was building a life from the ashes of another. That wedding, the one from all those years ago, rarely crossed my mind anymore. But on this day, the same Saturday I had once reserved for Brooke, it came back with clarity. Not to haunt me, just to remind me of who I had been, what I had carried, what I had survived. A few days before, I had received an email from a local women's outreach group I had worked with years ago. They were looking for a location to host a winter dinner for survivors of domestic violence and single mothers living in transitional housing. They had little to no budget and were hoping to find someone willing to donate space for one night. Without hesitation, I responded. I told them the venue was available, not just for the night, but for the whole weekend. I offered tables, linens, candles, warm lighting, and anything else they might need. I told them I'd take care of the food. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't need a logo on their brochure. I just needed that space to mean something again. They accepted. The team arrived the day before to set up. Women from all walks of life, most of them volunteers, moving with quiet determination. They arranged chairs, laid out plates, folded napkins into triangles with practiced care. Some of them looked at the venue with wonder, as if they couldn't believe it was real, like something out of a movie. I watched them from the corner, hands tucked into the sleeves of my sweater, a lump in my throat I didn't try to swallow down. The night of the dinner, the chapel filled with voices, not rehearsed toasts or choreographed laughter, real conversation, gentle, hesitant at first, and then louder as the room warmed. The long banquet table that had been meant for a bride and groom now held trays of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, and slices of apple pie dusted with cinnamon. Simple food, honest food. There were children, too, their feet swinging under the chairs, sticky fingers gripping cups of cider, faces smeared with chocolate from the dessert table. I watched one little girl run in circles under the string lights I had left up from fall. She laughed like she had never been told not to. At one point, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The cold wrapped around me like a coat, sharp and refreshing. The night sky was clear, stars pressing through the blackness like pinpricks in paper. I walked the perimeter of the venue slowly, stopping to adjust a lantern, to shake the snow off a bench. The air smelled like pine and firewood and cinnamon. When I returned inside, One of the women, a mother with two boys and a third on the way, stood at the threshold of the reception hall, just staring at the room. She didn't speak when I approached. She just nodded toward the space, tears welling in her eyes. Then she said softly, "It feels like we matter here." I felt something loosen in my chest at those words. They mattered. This mattered. Later, when the night ended and the guests filed out into the cold, wrapped in scarves and plastic bags filled with leftovers, one of the volunteers hugged me tightly. She said I should host more dinners like this. "Your place is magic," she whispered. "It shouldn't be wasted on people who don't see it." I stood in the center of the room after everyone had gone. Plates cleared, tables bare, lights dimmed, and I knew she was right. The space that had once been reserved for image and illusion had become something else entirely, not empty, not canceled, but reclaimed. That open date on the calendar was no longer a void. It was a beginning. I had always been someone who believed in giving. I gave time, money, space, energy. I gave without question, without expectation. I gave even when it hurt, even when the giving wasn't reciprocated. And for most of my life, I convinced myself that was love. That love meant showing up no matter how many times you were forgotten, forgiving before apologies were offered, accepting whatever scraps of affection someone was willing to toss back your way. I believed that being steady was enough. But something changed after that day at the gate. It wasn't revenge that had driven me to cancel Brooke's wedding. It wasn't bitterness or anger or the desire to humiliate her. What I did came from something deeper, something far more difficult to name, an instinct for survival. For the first time in my life, I chose to stop bleeding for someone who wouldn't notice the wound. I drew a line, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. My line was simple. I would no longer play a role in stories where my worth was conditional. After the winter dinner, the venue felt different, not just because of what had happened, but because of what it had become. It had been filled with women who knew what it was to be discarded, underestimated, left behind. They didn't ask for perfection. They didn't pose for photos or demand extra floral arrangements. They just needed to be somewhere that didn't make them feel like a burden. That's what I needed too. One morning, I was trimming back the lavender near the chapel when I caught the scent in the breeze. Warm, floral, familiar. And just like that, I was back in my sister's bedroom at 13, sitting cross-legged on the floor while she showed me how to press dried flowers between the pages of our mother's cookbooks. We laughed at how wrinkled the pages became, and she insisted it made the recipes taste more like spring. She was the warm one, the impulsive one, the kind who remembered birthdays with handmade cards and stopped to talk to every neighbor's dog. Her name was Maggie. Maggie was 4 years younger than me and somehow always older in spirit. She was the one who talked me out of bad dates and brought me soup when I was sick. She was the one who called just to hear my voice. And when Brooke was born, Maggie became a mother like she had been waiting her whole life for that role. She had this way of carrying Brooke on her hip like the child belonged there, like she'd always been a part of her body. Watching them together was like watching a poem in motion. And then, in an instant, she was gone. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday. I remember the way the officer stood on my porch, soaked through, his cap in his hands. I remember the sound I made, a low, guttural thing I didn't recognize. And then I remember Brooke, her tiny hand clutched in mine, wide-eyed and silent, asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Becoming her guardian wasn't a decision, it was a reflex. I moved her crib into my room, bought a secondhand stroller, started working double shifts. I did the things Maggie would have done. I tried to keep the rhythm of Maggie's love alive, like a song half remembered but never truly lost. There were moments in those early years when I would stand in the kitchen. the same one Maggie used to dance barefoot through and feel her there, in the clatter of dishes, in the way the sunlight touched the linoleum. She was gone, but she had left so much behind. I raised Brooke with her memory stitched into every bedtime story, every packed lunch, every scraped knee cleaned and kissed and bandaged. I carried Maggie forward in the choices I made, especially the quiet ones no one ever saw. So when Brooke called me bad vibes, what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she wasn't just dismissing me. She was dismissing the last trace of her mother I had tried to preserve. That realization didn't fill me with rage. It didn't even fill me with sadness. It just landed heavy and still, like a stone at the bottom of a well. I returned to the routines that grounded me. I woke early. I kept the grounds. I ran events with care and patience. But I stopped tolerating disrespect. I started saying no. I turned down clients who spoke down to my staff. I raised my prices. I canceled a contract with a vendor who had always treated me like a backup plan. I didn't explain myself. The more boundaries I drew, the freer I felt. The silence between Brooke and me stretched. Weeks turned into months. A mutual acquaintance told me she had rescheduled her wedding at a different venue. Smaller, less extravagant. According to gossip, the day had gone forward with a tighter guest list and a little more humility. I didn't attend. I wasn't invited. I didn't ask for photos. One morning, I received a card in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was short, just a few lines. I've been thinking a lot about what I said, about what I didn't say. I'm sorry, I wasn't kind. I hope you're okay. There was no name at the bottom. I placed the card in a drawer. I didn't respond. Maybe one day I would, but only if she crossed the line I had drawn with sincerity, not guilt, with truth, not manipulation. She would have to meet me where I stood now, not where I used to be. The world didn't collapse because I chose myself. No one came to burn down the venue. No one lined up to punish me for disappointing a bride. The sun still rose. The wind still rattled the windows at night. The birds still nested in the rafters. Life, it turned out, went on just fine without my constant sacrifice. That winter, I hosted 2 more community dinners. I started a book club at the local library. I visited an old friend I hadn't seen in 10 years. I let myself take long walks without my phone, bake without rushing, sleep in without guilt. I learned how to spend time alone and not feel lonely. People like me, women who give too much, who carry too many other people's needs, we're taught to believe that peace must be earned through endurance, that we are only valuable if we're useful, that love must always cost something. But I had learned the truth. Real peace is quiet, not because nothing is happening, but because you are no longer fighting to be seen. I was done performing love. I was done being polite about pain. My boundary wasn't a wall, it was a door, and this time it only opened from the inside.